Hello my friends, I'm Lucas and you are watching Demons PL. If you like my work, please remember to click thumb up, subscribe to my channel and write some comments. I think this model is a classic and many of us started by building this vehicle. Simply construction a few parts and we can have a model built in a few hours. Of course I'm talking about the version straight from the box without any additional work on accessories, photo etched and other great parts that are offered by many companies. And this is what happens when you shake the box thoroughly. For my model I used wheels from Panzerart because I had them in my collection. A set from Def model would probably be better due to the deflection of the tire, but I decided to solve this problem. It may not be a perfect solution, but if I have such a set at my disposal, I have no choice but to try to work with it. And the whole trick was to cut off a piece of the tire. A little bit that will cause some visual deception. What do you think? I think I managed to improve their appearance. It took me several minutes. The most important thing is not to overdo the amount of resin cut because it's irreversible. But you know, no risk, no fun. Before I started painting I attached the wheels to toothpicks and the vehicle to a stick for easier operating while working. The first step is to clean the surface well using a model degreaser. Thanks to this I can paint the model without using primer. The surface is sufficiently degreased and slightly matte that the paint adheres well enough. And I'm talking here about the Tamiya XF acrylic paint. I decided that my model would have a subtle camo of green stripes. A few minutes and the entire vehicle is properly painted. There weren't many details to paint, but I still had to spend some time painting them. Of course I used acrylic paints for this. Before I went any further, I covered the entire model with glossy varnish. This will make it easier for me to arrange the decals and initial weathering. Of course, not to waste time, I accelerated the drying with an accelerator. I moistened all the places where the transfers will appear with decals set liquid. This will improve their adhesion. Of course, don't overdo the amount of liquid because it may affect the surface of the paint and varnish. I completed the entire set of stickers using what the producer proposed, but also using several elements from my collection. All decals have been soaked in set liquid, which will properly blend them with the paint surface. This is especially useful on the doors and engine cover because of their construction and shape. After drying I painted the letters WH with white paint and replaced them with SS runes. This will mean taking over the vehicle and changing the owner. The white paint stands out well against the background of the original sticker. This way I have a complete set of markings and just a thin layer of varnish to even out the appearance and I can start weathering. The model is small, so making a wash didn't take much time. Of course, as is my custom, I also used it to paint dirt and streaks. Glossy varnish makes this work much easier because we can bring its final appearance to a satisfactory level much faster. A bit of scratching is recommended, but of course it has to be a really small amount. I focused mainly around the door and painted it with a dark brown paint. I also used a sponge, but also made some small dots by spraying diluted paint with a brush. This is a speckling technique. It has a cool name and it's very simple. The bottom of the vehicle was also slightly damaged, but I did it more for my own satisfaction than for the final appearance, because in a moment dust and mud will cover most of these painting antics. Before I even started dusting, I painted some dark dirt on the model using dark grey oil paint. Since the surface was shiny, it took me a little longer to properly distribute the paint on the individual elements. Live earth pigment jockey is a very useful product. I like to use it because after drying it creates a nice imitation of dust and a base for the possible use of pigments. When applied it may seem very intense, but after drying the level decreases. If you will be using this product for the first time, first check how it works on an older model or a piece of plastic. To protect the previous work I did with oil and wash paints, I covered the model with matte varnish. It was just because the pigment jockey is based on enamel. I smeared the entire wheels with pigment jockey to control the drying. The most important thing was for the pigment to fill the spaces between the tread blocks. Of course, the other parts of the wheel were also dirty. I prepared dry mud from the mixture shown here and applied it to the inner part of the fenders. I immediately added dry pigments to create a good looking texture. After all, you won't be able to see much of it anyway because the wheels will fill the entire space. I also applied dry mud on the bottom of the vehicle, and here I also added dry pigment to create a proper looking structure. Some quick trick to mask the trace left by a wooden holder. Finally, some stripping using a toothpick, cotton bud and a hobby knife. To highlight the dusty tires, I dabbed them with pigment and then whipped them with a sweaty finger. Thanks to this, excess powder remained on my finger and the most protruding elements of the tire were exposed. Some damp spots will add a cool look, not too much, only around the fenders and on the wheels, which makes the most sense. I painted a little more moisture on the underside of the vehicle, focusing on the recesses rather than the open surfaces. I washed off unnecessary traces of wet mud using universal weathering carrier. To paint the tow cable I used gunmetal acrylic paint, which after weathering will look good on the yellow camo background. To glue the windshield I used the special Transpa fix glue, which doesn't leave any marks on transparent elements. It's easy to use and very effective. Initially I wanted to stain the windshield with characteristic traces left by the wipers, but it seems too obvious to me. Therefore I stained the glass with pigment and then gently wiped it with cotton bud. I did it on both sides. I think there is a reason for this and it looks good. The back seat needed some development, so I prepared a few elements for it and started putting them together. I filled the free spaces with a tarp carelessly thrown into the back of the vehicle by the driver. It's a piece of paper tissue soaked in paint and PVA glue. This is a proven way to add interesting elements to the model. What I put there are mainly resin elements from various Plus model sets. Of course, the most important thing is the gramophone, which will play its role in the diorama I plan to create using this vehicle, but I will show it later. Completing the look, I used small piece of camo net that I soaked in water and placed on the back of the vehicle. Of course, just like the tarp, the mesh was previously painted and soaked in glue, and now I just soften it. To fix its appearance I added a few drops of solution for sands and pigments. This is more than enough to keep the net in place. After drying I added another smaller but brighter tarp and a piece of chain. I used the solution once again and after it dried I rubbed the mesh with some pigment. Not forgetting about the unfinished towing cable, I added wash to it and then slightly stained it with pigment. This is how I finished working on this model. All that remains is to add a driver figure and place it in appropriate environment. But as I mentioned, this will be shown another time. My patrons will definitely see it sooner, and now I would like to thank them very much. The people who helped me the most are Bulldog09, Christopher Obarski, Dan Dubois, Dan Majchrzak, Hans Zapp, Karsten Inkedi and Steve Ankin. But the people listed just now are also my great patrons. Please don't forget that you can be one of them. And I realize it's not easy these days, but if you have a few bucks you could drop in my cup, that would be great. Thanks! And if you are still here, one note for the end. Please use 7 days free trial to see what I offer. You will have full access to the content of the page. It's much better than joining for free, because for free you will see only some notifications about new posts I add to my wall. So please consider joining. That's all for today, see you next time, cheers!